My name is Maya. I was raised by two down-to-earth parents who, through consistent hard work, amassed considerable savings, yet chose to live like any typical middle-class family. Perhaps that's why I turned out the way I did, practical, somewhat reserved, and more comfortable with numbers and coding than with casual conversation. It was after a particularly grueling week of debugging software that my phone vibrated. It was Eloise, a friend from my college days when life seemed far less complicated. Hey Maya, it's been a while. Are you free this Saturday? There's this nostalgic river cruise you should join, she suggested. Normally, I'd have looked for any excuse to decline, but Eloise's timing was impeccable. I was in dire need of a change from my regular routine of coffee and coding, so I accepted. The sun was setting as I reached the pier. The cruise ship was an endearing, albeit slightly weathered vessel that seemed as if it had seen its share of adventures. Boarding the ship, I felt distinctly out of place in my baggy sweater and worn jeans amid a lively crowd dressed for a festive evening. I found a quiet spot on the deck, and as the ship began to move, the air filled with music and laughter. Nursing my drink, I felt the social gap between me and the others widen. Then he appeared, Hayden. I didn't know his name yet, but his loud laughter and easy charm were unmistakable. He navigated the crowd with a grace I envied. Just then, Eloise reappeared, her timing as perfect as ever. Maya, you really should meet someone, she said, and before I knew it, she had fetched Hayden. Hey, he greeted me with that effortless smile, pulling up a chair. Eloise tells me you're in tech. That's cool. I can hardly update my apps without help, he chuckled. His words might have felt dismissive, but his tone was genuinely admiring, and to my surprise, I found myself laughing. I do a bit more than just updates, I replied. It's not glamorous, though. Lots of late nights staring at screens. Our conversation flowed naturally from work to hobbies, a rarity for me when meeting someone new. Hayden didn't seem to mind that I wasn't a part of the usual, vibrant crowd. As the evening unfolded under the warm glow of the ship's lights and the distant city skyline, we were both surprised when the announcement came that we were heading back to the pier. We should do this again, Hayden suggested as we docked, asking for my number. Surprisingly, I found myself agreeing and typing my number into his phone. Hayden was true to his word and called the very next day. Hey Maya, free for dinner this week? There's this quirky little diner I think you'll like. Intrigued, I agreed. The diner was a cozy spot, tucked away on a side street, adorned with vintage memorabilia and the soft sounds of old hits from a jukebox. It was perfectly laid back, with no pretensions. As we settled in, Hayden's charm was in full swing, intuitively guessing my preferences as if he had known me for years. It was both flattering and a little surprising how comfortable I felt. I lightly joked, "You get me, don't you?" as the waitress set down our milkshakes, his chocolate and mine strawberry, exactly how I prefer. Hey, I pay attention, he replied with a wink, encouraging me to dive into details about the app one was developing. I shared about my latest project, simplifying the technical details. Hayden seemed more intrigued by the stories behind the coding, and his interest in me as a person was apparent. As we wrapped up our meal, he insisted, "Dinner's on me tonight. You can get the next one." It was a small offer, but it felt significant, a simple pact between us that continued to define our relaxed and spontaneous dates. A few months into our relationship, Hayden suggested we meet his parents. I was understandably nervous, but he reassured me, they're laid back. You'll see. His parents resided in an affluent neighborhood, their home both spacious and impeccably decorated. We were greeted with warm smiles and ushered into a living room that could have been featured in a home decor magazine. Maya, lovely to finally meet you, his mother, Cora, said as she embraced me. Hayden has told us so much about you. Dinner was an elegant affair, but soon, the conversation took a probing turn. His father, Tyler, led with, "So, Maya, Hayden tells us you're in tech. That must be good money." As I nodded, playing it cool, "It's a growing field." "I've been fortunate," Cora added, with a scrutinizing look, "and they pay well at your company? Must be nice being so young and independent." I responded, "Yeah, it's decent," and focused on my meal. Hayden gave me a reassuring nudge under the table, signaling to keep things light. As the evening progressed, the questions subtly shifted towards my family background. "And your parents, what did they do?" Tyler inquired, wine glass in hand. "They're retired now. My dad used to run a small business," I explained. Cora's expression fleetingly dropped. "Oh, interesting," she said, her disappointment barely masked. "They must be proud of you making your own way." The rest of the evening was filled with more superficial chatter, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been subtly interrogated. On the drive home, I mentioned to Hayden, "Your folks sure ask a lot about money," trying to keep the tone light. Hayden chuckled. "That's just them being curious, don't worry about it." Yet, something felt off, as if they were assessing me, gauging something more than just how well I meshed with their son. My parents lived in a modest, cozy home. The kind you might overlook, but filled with warmth and genuine contentment. As Hayden and I arrived, my father stood by the door, his expression hard to read. "This is it," Hayden remarked, scanning the simple setting. "Yep, this is home," I affirmed with a forced smile. "It's not large, but it's full of heart." Inside, my mom had prepared a humble spread of home-cooked meals, the kind Hayden wasn't accustomed to. My dad reached out with a firm handshake. We settled in the living room, and the conversation felt awkward, the atmosphere charged with an unspoken tension. Hayden's gaze wandered, taking in the dated decor and family photos on the shelves. "So, Mr. Tucker, Maya told me you used to run a business. What was it?" he inquired, his curiosity tinged with an undertone that seemed more about sizing up than genuine interest. My dad chuckled, a sound that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Oh, a little of this, a little of that." Hayden's father had spent most of his career in trucking before retiring, a straightforward, unglamorous job. Meanwhile, Mrs. Tucker had always been a homemaker. As Hayden glanced around, his eyes briefly met mine, seemingly searching for any flaws in my family's background. My mother responded with a radiant smile, her demeanor undisturbed by the subtle tensions. "It's been a fulfilling life, not centered around money, but around our close-knit family," she declared. I could see the tension in my father's expression as Hayden responded with a polite nod, clearly unimpressed. Dinner passed quietly, with Hayden offering compliments on the meal, though the conversation soon dwindled once again. After dinner, as we escorted Hayden to his car, my father whispered, "Think about what I said, Maya. There's no rush on the wedding." His concerned gaze lingered as I hugged him, but my emotions for Hayden blinded me to any caution. Our wedding was precisely as I had envisioned, simple and intimate. We exchanged vows in a quaint chapel, surrounded by a handful of friends and relatives. The day was about our commitment, not the spectacle. Post-ceremony, we settled into my modern apartment, which I had invested in heavily. Hayden was genuinely thrilled as he explored every corner. "This is all ours now, huh?" he remarked, embracing me from behind as we admired the cityscape from our living room window. "Ours," I confirmed, leaning into his warmth, feeling a new chapter of our life begin. Life with Hayden soon fell into a comfortable routine where my higher income was just another element of our daily life. It never bothered me. I loved my job and was happy that it provided more than just personal fulfillment. It brought stability. His parents, Cora and Tyler, were always kind to me, particularly during holidays and their birthdays, perhaps because I never hesitated with gifts, a fancy blender for Mother's Day, and a high-end drill set for Father's Day, among others. As Christmas approached, gift expectations seemed to escalate. We were at their house, enjoying coffee, when Cora casually hinted, "Maya, Tyler, and I have been thinking about getting new phones. The latest models just came out." I almost choked on my coffee. "Those are pretty pricey, aren't they?" I remarked. Cora, not breaking eye contact, replied, "Yes, but nothing but the best for us, right?" I hesitated, feeling the trap set before me. "Of course, but don't you think those phones are a bit excessive for what you use them for? It's more sensible to consider less expensive options." Cora's expression hardened. Sensible or cheap? Hayden suddenly stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Mom's right. Why are you being like this, Maya?" "It's Christmas." Cornered, I stood my ground. I'm not trying to be cheap. I just don't see the point in splurging on tech that isn't essential. It's wasteful. Hayden's response was icy. So, caring for my parents is wasteful now, he retorted. Before I could explain, he was already heading for the door, his demeanor distant and curt in the days that followed. Caught in turmoil, not wanting to lose him, yet stifled by the unfairness of it all, I eventually capitulated. I purchased the smartphones, top of the line, one for each of them. When I presented the beautifully wrapped gift boxes to Cora and Tyler, their reactions were almost humorous. "Oh, Maya, you really didn't have to," Cora gushed, her tone laced with a hint of triumph. Tyler, beaming, clapped me on the back. "That's my girl. Knew you'd come through." Hayden's demeanor suddenly brightened. He hugged me, whispering his thanks as if the past week's tension filled with silent meals and cold shoulders had never happened. Everything unraveled on a seemingly normal day. I was at my desk early, working through my second coffee and scanning lines of code, when Mr. Maxwell unexpectedly called us into the conference room. His voice trembled as he broke the news. "Team, I'll be direct, the company is bankrupt. We're closing down effective immediately." The room fell into a stunned silence. Bankrupt. My job, my income, it all seemed to disintegrate before my eyes. I held myself together until I reached home, where I hoped Hayden's presence might reassure me. "Hayden," I began, my voice wavering. "The company, we're bankrupt. I've lost my job." Initially shocked, Hayden's face quickly hardened. "You can find another job, right? Something that pays well." His immediate concern for money over my well-being stung, but I brushed it aside. "I'll try," I replied, "but it might take some time." The ensuing months blurred into a relentless cycle of job applications and interviews. Each mention of my last company's bankruptcy seemed to taint the interviewer's perceptions, as if misfortune was infectious. Our finances dwindled, our savings evaporated, and soon, the inevitable happened. We couldn't afford our apartment's rent any longer. Hayden suggested, quite casually, "We should move in with my parents until you find something." It makes sense. Living with his parents turned out to be far from easy. Cora and Tyler's warmth disappeared the moment they realized I was no longer the financial powerhouse I had been. Meals became tense, peppered with not-so-subtle comments about the hard times and the need for me to contribute more. One evening, while I was wrapping up some freelance work, Cora advised, "Maya, dear, try to keep the showers short, will you? Water bills aren't cheap, you know." Dinner that night felt like a trial. Before I even began eating, Tyler started, "You know, Maya, we're happy to help you too, but having you here does bring extra expenses. We're not a bank." My fork paused in midair. "I understand," I replied. "I'm trying to find work. It's just been tough." Hayden remained silent, his quiet adding a suffocating weight to the already heavy atmosphere. Hayden's patience thinned. He snapped over trivial things like unwashed dishes or lights left on. One evening, after another disappointing day of job rejections for me, he exploded. "Why can't you just find a job?" he yelled. "I'm trying, Hayden." "It's not like I'm not trying," I shot back, my frustration boiling over. "Well, try harder. This isn't working. You sitting at home, and I'm stuck here because of you." His words felt like a slap. This was not the same man who had vowed to support me through thick and thin. Every day, the demeaning comments from Cora about freeloaders and Tyler's frequent complaints about supporting me chipped away at my spirit. I felt increasingly isolated and trapped. I longed to call my parents, craving even a few words of comfort in this relentless storm. But I couldn't bring myself to tell them. Their daughter was living like this, dependent and despised. It would shatter their hearts. Cora's birthday dinner was meant to be a small, cozy affair, an opportunity to celebrate within the close-knit circle of family at a nice downtown restaurant. However, I should have tempered my expectations, knowing all too well the absence of warmth in what had become a daily battle to preserve my dignity. As we entered the restaurant, the atmosphere was thick with artificial pleasantries. Cora radiated joy, relishing being the center of attention, while Tyler discussed the pricey wine he planned to order. Hayden was oddly cheerful, laughing exaggeratedly at every minor jest his parents made. As we settled at our table and the waiter distributed the menus, I immediately noticed that mine was different, thinner. Perplexed, I opened it to find a significantly more restricted selection. I glanced around to see Hayden and his parents perusing a variety of gourmet options. "Why do I have a different menu?" I asked, striving to maintain a composed voice. Hayden peeked at my menu and smirked. "Oh, that's the budget menu. We thought it would be more suitable for you right now," he said. Cora laughed lightly, adding, "Yes, with no job, you shouldn't be looking at the expensive meals. We have to economize somewhere." Tyler joined in with a boisterous laugh. "Exactly. Maybe just stick to the bread and water." As their words cut deep. Hayden chuckled along with his parents, treating it all as a grand joke. The humiliation scorched my cheeks, and I felt the piercing stares of other diners, some even whispering and pointing their phones in our direction. "I'm not just some freeloader." I stood up, my hands trembling. "When I had money, you all loved the gifts I bought. You loved going out and ordering whatever you wanted because I was paying. And now, I'm just a burden to you?" The restaurant fell silent, all eyes on our table. Hayden reached for my arm, attempting to pull me back into my seat. "Maya, stop this now, you're overreacting," he implored. I jerked my arm away, gathering my purse. "No, I'm done. I'm done being the punchline to your cruel jokes." With every eye in the restaurant on us, Hayden and his parents sat frozen, their faces flushed with embarrassment as murmurs filled the air. I walked out, the cool night air striking my face, a mix of relief and dread churning in my stomach. I didn't return to the celebration. Instead, I went straight to their house, my hands shaking as I hastily packed my bags, throwing in everything essential. The drive back to my parents' house was a journey filled with mixed emotions. The last few months had drained me, and returning to my childhood home felt both like a defeat and a sanctuary. I found my dad in his usual spot, the old recliner in the living room, reading a newspaper. He looked up, his face shifting from surprise to concern as he saw my state. "Maya, what happened?" he asked, his voice steady yet filled with worry. I sank onto the sofa, the weight of everything suddenly too much. "Dad, it's all gone wrong. Hayden, his parents, they were just using me. And now I've lost my job, my marriage, everything." Dad set his newspaper aside, his brow furrowed. "I saw it, Maya. I saw it from the start. But you had to see it for yourself. They were freeloaders, parasites." Tears welled up as his words confirmed my worst fears. "I feel so foolish," I whispered. "But now I've got nothing left," I said, feeling the weight of my world collapsing. Dad leaned forward, his gaze intensifying as he looked at me. "You're mistaken, Maya. You have something invaluable that they can't ever take away. Your intelligence, your skills. Remember who you are," he encouraged. He rose and walked over to his desk in the corner of the room, where he pulled out a checkbook and began writing. "I've been setting money aside for you. Not for a rainy day like this necessarily, but to help launch you when you were ready," he explained as he handed me the check. I glanced at the amount, $400,000, my eyes bulging in astonishment. "This is for you to kickstart your own IT company, just like you've always wanted," he stated, his voice resolute. I embraced him, my heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, Dad. I promise I won't let you down." The following days were a whirlwind of activity. I reached out to my former colleagues, many of whom were still unemployed after our company's fall. "Hey, it's Maya. I'm putting together something new, and I want you in. Are you interested?" Almost all of them responded with eager enthusiasm, grateful for the chance to get back to work. We secured a modest office space in the downtown area, and I invested part of the money to properly equip it. My friend Eloise, an online journalist, caught wind of what I was doing and was thrilled. "Maya, this is incredible. Let me write about it. People need to know who's spearheading the new tech movement in our city." Her article went live a week later, outlining my journey and the vision for my new venture. It quickly drew the attention of potential clients, and soon enough, we landed our first contracts. Hayden's call caught me off guard. His tone was icy, detached. Coming over tomorrow. The divorce papers are ready. I went to the familiar house the next morning, steeling myself for what awaited. Hayden opened the door, his greeting nothing more than a nod towards the living room where his smug-looking parents were seated. There she is, the freeloader, Cora muttered audibly as I walked in. I ignored her and focused on Hayden, who thrust a stack of papers at me. Sign here, he instructed, pointing indifferently to the signature line. His contempt was clear, but I wasn't there to reconcile. I signed my name, each stroke severing ties with the life I once feared losing. As I set down the pen, Tyler chuckled. Well, that's one problem solved. Good riddance. Hayden's eyes were fixed on the papers, but Cora stared directly at me, her expression a blend of triumph and relief. We're finally free of the burden. Hopefully, you can manage on your own without leeching off someone else, she said. I couldn't help but smile, feeling a surge of vindication, knowing what I was about to reveal. I swiftly pulled out my phone and tapped on the screen, then showed them the article, Rising Star in Tech. Maya Tucker launches innovative IT firm. I watched their faces morph from confusion to shock. Maya, how? Where did you get the money for this? Hayden stuttered, his previous disdain giving way to disbelief. My father, I said simply, locking eyes with him. Tucker, the owner of the trading company you never bothered to inquire about because we lived too simply for your tastes. Hayden's mouth opened and closed, struggling to find words. Cora's face turned pale, her earlier smugness completely erased. Why choose a modest home? Given your wealth, they questioned incredulously. I explained calmly, my son, we've never pursued extravagance. We've always cherished other values, unlike some. Their stunned silence filled the room, marking the moment my sense of liberation grew stronger. As Hayden's parents fumbled through their apologies, trying to explain their earlier comments, I raised my hand to cut them off. Please, save your excuses. Today, you've shown your true selves, and it's been quite enlightening. I interrupted, turning to leave, their feeble apologies trailing off behind me. Hayden chased after me, his face etched with desperation. Maya, can we try again? None of this was meant to hurt you. Let's fix this, he pleaded. Facing him one last time, I replied firmly, no, Hayden, we can't. Goodbye. That farewell marked the end I needed. As I drove off, my phone buzzed incessantly with texts, more pleas from Hayden and his parents. But I was resolved. I replied with a single, definitive word that felt like sealing the past behind me. No. Back in the tranquility of my new office, I took a deep breath. Starting afresh hadn't been simple, but as I surveyed the bustling office filled with my dedicated team, I felt confident in my decision. These were the people I chose to invest in, individuals who valued hard work and innovation, not those who measured relationships by their wealth.
What the hell is going on? You didn't make lunch today? My husband, Jared, abruptly yelled over the phone. His voice was sharp, filled with irritation that I hadn't made his lunch and that I had been away from home. I told you to look after yourself while I was gone, I replied, trying to stay calm. But you're a housewife, right? He shot back, not convinced. Why you're skipping? You're a housewife who skips duties? I couldn't believe he was making such a big deal about not having lunch for one day. What a small man, I thought to myself. I was tired of doing all the housework and then being blamed when things didn't go the way he wanted. As I ended the call, I noticed my mother-in-law standing beside me, a faint smile on her face, as she listened to our exchange. My name is Melody, and I live with my husband and our 2 children, Sean and Eric, who are twin boys, just 2 years old. Raising these children is the source of my greatest happiness, and I adore being their mother. Jared, my husband, is a typical businessman. His family owns a Japanese-style confectionery store in a shopping arcade corner. I quit my job shortly after our marriage, and now assist my in-laws with their store. I started working at the shop with a light heart, but it turned out to be much busier than I had anticipated. I not only serve customers who come for the colorful selection of wagashi, but I also make sweets in the back kitchen. Early mornings are my time in the kitchen, especially during the busiest times of the year. After the birth of my twins, I continued to help at the store. Sometimes, I'd be standing in the store with my children on my back, their cries occasionally carrying through the shop, even when I was trying to keep them calm, away from the customers. Despite caring for my young children, I kept working at the store. Jared, on the other hand, remained indifferent to the Wagashia. "Hey, do you still have no plans to take over the confectionery business?" I asked him one day, hoping to get a serious answer. "I've told you numerous times, Melody, I'm not going to take over the store," Jared replied, almost dismissively. "Isn't Wagashia so lame these days? The number of people in the shopping arcade is decreasing year by year. If I take over the confectionery business now, I'll have no future," he explained. His lack of interest in the family business was obvious. Even though he couldn't take over the store immediately because of his job at a larger corporation, I couldn't help but feel disappointed. I like my in-laws' store and don't want to see it disappear. "Are you going to the slot machines again today, Jared?" I asked one weekend as he prepared to leave. "Of course I am," he answered nonchalantly. "Is it harmful? What I do on my day off is entirely up to me," Jared stated. On holidays, Jared always goes out to play slot machines, often getting in line as soon as the place opens. Despite his hobbies, he ignores the housework, leaving it all to me: cooking, cleaning, laundry, and taking care of the children. Child rearing, the most important aspect, was completely left to me. Jared spent his time as he pleased while I juggled housework, childcare, and the confectionery shop. My in-laws are getting older, and my workload at the shop is increasing. My mother-in-law in particular is very understanding of my situation. "Melody, you help us with the store, and we are very grateful. Thank you so much for everything," she often says with a warm smile. She's a lovely lady, not fitting the typical stereotype of a difficult mother-in-law. Her kindness always touches my heart. "I really need Jared's assistance," she mentioned to me once. "He no longer appears to be interested in the confectionery, and it makes me sad," she lamented. "I've tried talking to him, but he refuses to agree," I replied, sharing her disappointment. "Well, we're lucky to have such a wonderful wife like you, Melody," she said, trying to console me, and added, "We should stop being greedy." Her praise was comforting, as was her support with the children. When I'm at the store, she and my father-in-law babysit the kids, which is a huge help. Over time, she became my confidant, the person I could talk to about anything, including my complaints about Jared. Ironically, as the distance between my husband and me grew, my bond with my mother-in-law strengthened. Their presence is very reassuring to me, especially now. Life flies by in a blur. Raising 2 children means each day is a whirlwind, with no time to think about much else. As the end of the year approaches, the Wagashia gets busier. It coincides with the end-of-year gift-giving season, a time of transition. After consulting with my in-laws, I decided to stay at their place this year to focus on wagashi preparation. I informed Jared of my plan. "What? You're taking the kids and staying at my parents' house?" he asked, clearly upset. "I'm only staying for one night to help out on a busy day," I explained. "How about the housework?" he asked, as expected. Jared, who doesn't do any housework, gets upset even if I miss just one day, even during the busiest season for the confectionery. "I'll only be away for one night, Jared. Can't you manage during that time? It's just one day. If you get hungry, you can prepare something simple. There won't even be any laundry to do if it's just for one day," I reassured him, but he continued to complain. "You know what? You're still a housewife, aren't you? And I'm the family's breadwinner. Who do you think is in charge of feeding our 2 children?" He rebuked me. His words stung, but I didn't want to argue any longer. I didn't say anything else, took the kids, and left for my in-laws' house without his permission. When I arrived at my parents' house, I was met with a mountain of work. It was the end of the year, and business was brisk at the Wagashia. Orders for year-end gifts were pouring in faster than usual, and my decision to stay and assist felt justified. The creation of gift items began with assembling empty boxes, an unexpectedly challenging task, especially at the end of the year when hundreds of boxes needed to be made. My in-laws and I divided up the duties, and by the end of the first day I was exhausted. The next day I had to get up early to work on making wagashi. To prepare for the busy day ahead, I went to bed early, and by the time dawn arrived, I was already working in the kitchen. While the kids were still sleeping, my in-laws and I quietly prepared the wagashi. As the sun rose, December's crisp morning air filled the house. We took a break for breakfast as the kids woke up, ready to eat. I quickly prepared their meal and served it at the table. They came running up to me smiling, as my in-laws, sons and I all sat around the table together. My phone rang right then and there. It was my husband who called. "What the heck is going on? You didn't make lunch today," he yelled as soon as I picked up the phone. He seemed irritated that there was no lunchbox, which was supposed to be available at all times. "I told you to make your own lunch while I was gone. Did you forget?" I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "What do you mean, avoiding housework?" he snapped back. When I told my husband that he should prepare the food himself, he seemed unconvinced. "Are you just being lazy?" he added. I was stunned by his words. What a prick, making such a big deal about not having lunch for just one day. He leaves everything up to me, and when things don't go his way, he transforms into this. My in-laws, who could clearly hear my husband yelling over the phone, were just as shocked as I was. Finally, he rambled on about what he wanted to say before abruptly hanging up. Even though breakfast had just been served, the living room of my in-laws' house was quiet for a while. My husband had lost his cool in an unreasonable way, just as expected. The kids seemed to sense the tense atmosphere and refused to eat their breakfast. My mother-in-law cheerfully said, "Let's eat," urging my sons to eat as well, trying to lighten the mood. Then she turned to face me and said, "Why don't you divorce my son, Melody?" I froze, my hand halfway to my tea. I never expected my mother-in-law to say something like that to me. My father-in-law was eating his breakfast quietly, an indescribable expression on his face. "I believe I was a little out of line," my mother-in-law continued. "But now that you've been told something like that, I believe you've come to your senses." She smiled at me. It seemed that when a person was truly disgusted, there was no choice but to laugh. "I feel terrible for you, as a mother," she said. "You are no longer required to be merciful to my son. Allow your emotions to guide you," she added. My mother-in-law had probably figured out how I felt about him by now. She was on my side, always supportive and encouraging. My father-in-law never spoke, but he nodded in agreement with her words. Their presence was reassuring to me, and it was on this day that I returned home, my mind made up. I waited for my husband's return. When he got home later that evening, he had a tense expression on his face, still upset that I hadn't prepared his lunch. "We need to talk," I said, motioning for him to sit down. "What do you want to talk about?" he asked, cocking his brow at me. "Just sit down," I insisted, ignoring his mood. When he finally sat down, looking grim, I held out the divorce papers. "I'm going to divorce you," I uttered. The word divorce slipped out of my mouth, and his grumpy expression abruptly changed to one of surprise. "Why are you saying divorce so suddenly? Are you kidding me? The kids are still so young," he said, panicking. He couldn't understand why I was seeking a divorce. He was adamant, claiming there was no reason for it and trying to avoid the discussion by saying it was invalid. But I had a reason, and I wasn't going to let him escape this time. I pulled a few photos from an envelope on the table. "There's a picture of you walking with a woman, holding hands. Didn't you say you go to the slot machines on your days off? What exactly is this? You seem to be having a good time," I accused him. When he saw the photo, his face turned pale. "No, this is, well, listen to me," he stammered, trying to make up some nonsense excuse. "She's just an acquaintance." "She's a junior employee at your company, isn't she?" I said, watching as his movements ceased. My husband had been having an affair with a younger woman who worked at the same company. I had been suspicious of his behavior and had discussed it with my mother-in-law for some time. She suggested I hire a detective to investigate. The findings of the investigation astounded me. He had entered a slot machines parlor with the woman and then gone directly to her house. "I have more photos," I said, pushing the evidence towards him. "You two are very close, so the detective took many photos. Would you like to see more?" I suggested. When confronted with undeniable evidence, he finally confessed. "I'm sorry, Melody," he said, his voice breaking. "I was just experimenting with fire. I'm sorry for the kids. I'm leaving this girl right now, so please don't divorce me," he began to beg. He was no longer at my mercy, apologized emphatically. However, I will never forgive him. I'm not joking, I said coldly. I've been helping out at your parents' home while babysitting, taking care of things you don't want to do. I've informed your father and mother about this, I firmly stated. My parents? He asked, his voice trembling. Yes, they're on my side, not yours. They've both said they'll assist me in any way they can. We work together, so there was plenty of time to talk. They're furious with you. Of course, I told them we were divorcing, I explained. My husband completely lost his cool, breaking down in tears. Please, I would never do something like this, he muttered, overwhelmed. He kept repeating that he didn't want a divorce. I can't do this anymore, I said firmly and added, you'll pay alimony and child support. I informed him of the divorce, ignoring his desperate pleas. In the end, we divorced. I insisted on alimony payments from both my husband and the woman with whom he had the affair. He had to pay child support for our children as well. After losing his job and the woman losing her position at the company due to their affair, my in-laws were furious. They cut him off from the family, barring him from their home. With no one to rely on, he's now forced to work manual labor from morning to night just to pay his bills. After the divorce, I continued working at the Wagashia. My in-laws asked me to stay. I enjoy working there, and of course, I need to support my children. They want me to run the store after they retire, eventually giving me the store and their home. Naturally, I intend to take over in the future. I will be the confectionery's proprietress. I'll continue to work hard at my job and raise my children while looking ahead. Building a home is a significant event in one's life. Please listen to the story of my marital relationship that collapsed immediately after reaching the pinnacle of happiness. I'm Josie, and I'm 30 years old. My family consists of my husband, River, who is 35, and our 3-year-old daughter, London. We are going to build our long-awaited dream house. When I say this, people often respond with, "You must be living a perfect and happy life." Well, that's not the case for me. Lately, I've been constantly worried about our house under construction and my in-laws. The first step towards the collapse was when I left my daughter with my in-laws. My husband and I both work, so we hardly have any time on weekdays. We would usually go out on weekends to look at properties and discuss house designs. Since my daughter would get bored and fussy along the way, I would always leave her with my parents, who live nearby. However, one morning my father fell ill and had to go to the hospital. I received a message saying that they couldn't take care of London. It couldn't be helped, so I decided to cancel our plans for the day. That's what I thought, but my husband suggested, what if we asked my parents to take care of her? To be honest, I don't get along well with my in-laws. They believe that as the son's wife, I don't need to hold back and can say whatever I want. What era are we in? Besides, I feel hesitant about suddenly asking them to take care of a 3-year-old. But if we postponed today's plans, the completion of our house would be delayed. I struggled with the decision, but I had no choice for today, so I decided to entrust my daughter to my in-laws. As soon as I finished my errands that day, I went straight to my in-laws' house with an expensive box of sweets as a gift. In the evening, we arrived at my in-laws' house, and perhaps thanks to the gift, they responded cheerfully. After politely thanking my in-laws, we started heading home when my daughter suddenly asked, "Where is Grandpa and Grandma's room in the new house?" I was taken aback. "London, what are you talking about? Did Grandpa and Grandma ask you that?" I asked her. "I don't know," she replied, ending the conversation and starting to talk to her stuffed penguin. London calls my parents Mom's Grandpa and Mom's Grandma. Grandpa and Grandma refer to no one other than my in-laws. I thought, I see. Grandpa and Grandma must have been wondering if there's a room for them when they come to our house. Since then, my in-laws have started visiting us frequently, targeting the times when my husband and I are at home, such as weekday evenings and holidays. Our family is currently living in a small and old rental apartment to save money for buying a house. Whenever my in-laws come to our house, they immediately settle down in the dining area or on the sofa and ask to see the documents related to our house under construction. Even before I can stop them, my husband eagerly presents the documents and starts explaining to my in-laws. Why do they need to see them? I thought, frustrated. It's already uncomfortable enough that they come over so often. After that, my mother-in-law would bombard me with a series of questions, as if she were in a parliamentary debate. I'm the one who has to answer the questions, not my husband. It's as if the chairperson is speaking through her. Regarding this floor plan, don't you think the kitchen's location here is inconvenient? She asked. Please change it. Since there are few small rooms, add more. Everyone feels comfortable in small rooms as they get older. Besides, having only one children's room won't be enough when you have another child, she unceremoniously suggested. I hesitated due to her assertiveness, trying to stay calm. Based on discussions between my husband and me, following proper procedures and having meetings with the contractor, the foundation work has already begun. It's no longer possible to change the layout, so please understand. I responded somewhat angrily. Well, she continued, ignoring my frustration, I have many friends, and I visited various homes and carefully observed different rooms with my discerning eye. I can immediately tell which rooms are comfortable and which furniture has good taste. This room is completely unacceptable. It will drive away good fortune, and even work won't go well. It's the worst, my mother-in-law declared. She claims to be a professional, but she's just a blood-sucking bug. My mother-in-law is so annoying that I jokingly said, in that case, should we make it a two-family house and split the cost? But my in-laws got furious. My father-in-law shouted, Are you telling us to give you money, you ungrateful child? A two-family house? I hate anything that feels so formal and lonely, he concluded. That day, my in-laws left early. As they walked out, I thought, Go home, go home. You're not even real parents. There's no need to be told to be filial. That night, after putting our daughter to bed, my husband approached me with an irritated expression. My parents are just trying to give us advice out of goodwill, so don't be so cold, he said. Cold? That's not my intention, I replied, feeling defensive. Besides, aren't your parents the ones being much more disrespectful? They keep meddling in our house matters and always try to one-up us. They treat me like a fool just because I'm the daughter-in-law, I continued. They're our parents, so it's only natural, he shot back. You're being incredibly rude to their well-intentioned advice. You're such an insensitive woman. Seriously, calm down and reflect, River accused me. After that, my husband turned away and refused to speak. Well, they are your parents, no doubt about that, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But we have our own separate family. Besides, we haven't received any financial assistance from your parents. It's rude to keep giving unsolicited opinions without contributing financially, I retorted. My husband told me to calm down, but instead of cooling off, I became even more angry at his unreasonable choice of words. That night, I had trouble falling asleep. After all the ups and downs, our house was finally completed. Our family moved in with excitement and began living in our new home. Then River said, Starting today, my parents will be living with us. We can use the larger room upstairs for my father and the smaller one for my mother. It shouldn't be a problem, right? He dumbfounded me. Hold on a second, I protested, shocked. Why are you suddenly saying such things? Didn't we decide to use one of the rooms upstairs as London's room? I never agreed to live with your parents. Besides, your father and mother might not like that room considering how they usually are, I added. They won't say anything, River replied, brushing off my concerns. They've already seen the rooms, so don't worry. Your parents saw the rooms? When? I asked, feeling a sinking sensation in my stomach. I think it was the day before we went for the house viewing, he said. Wait a minute, I demanded, needing to confirm. Your parents came to see this house the day before we went for the viewing. Yes, River admitted. They said they wanted to see it, so I gave them the key I was holding. It's not a big deal. They just wanted to take a look. It doesn't cost anything, he added excitedly. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My husband seemed annoyed, as if the conversation was over, and went back to working on the TV wiring that was left unfinished. It does cost something. And it just decreased and quite dramatically, he muttered. I didn't want to see his face, so I left the kitchen, leaving the unpacking as it was, and went upstairs. I closed the door, locked it, and tried to organize my thoughts, which were in disarray due to confusion and anger. I felt relieved that London was at the nursery school because it allowed me to think alone. Thanks to that, I could think clearly and calmly. I didn't want to be with those people anymore, not even for a second. However, we had just made a big purchase, a house. I needed to be calm and composed. I needed to think about what to say and what not to say. I needed to think about our future, mine and London's. I stayed in the room, contemplating and keeping these thoughts in mind while waiting for my in-laws to arrive. As my husband had said, my in-laws arrived in the early afternoon, along with a truck carrying their belongings. "You should at least read us. You guys have no common sense. Oh, it's still a mess here. You're so clumsy," my mother-in-law complained as they entered our newly built house. I was listening attentively from the second floor, so I came out of the room and headed towards the entrance. "Father-in-law, mother-in-law, I never heard anything about living together with you," I said, my voice firm and determined, surprisingly cold. My father-in-law looked annoyed and quickly shot back. "I told River there shouldn't be any problem." "No, there is a problem," I replied. "I heard from River this morning that you and mother-in-law have the intention to live together. Besides, I have no intention of living with you, not with such rude people," I stated outright. "What did you say?" my father-in-law shouted. "River said it was fine." "That's right," my mother-in-law chimed in. "You're such an impudent daughter-in-law. If you don't like it, why don't you leave, Josie?" "No, it's not going to work," I said, shaking my head. I had been thinking for a long time that our ways of thinking were too different to have a conversation with these people. As I was thinking about how to fight back, my husband came rushing over in a panic. "What are you doing, Josie? Don't fight with my parents," he demanded. "Fight? It's not an equal fight," I shot back. "I'm being verbally abused just because I'm a wife, and now I'm being blamed by my husband again," I resented. I realized again that this parent and child were the same. "River, I can't live with your parents," I exclaimed. "You can't?" River said, exasperated. "Don't make things difficult for me. You're my wife, so you should obey your husband, right?" he continued. "Before I am your wife, I am a human being," I replied sharply and added, "Do you think you can force me to obey you?" My father-in-law, who had been listening to our conversation, said, "I don't want a wife like that." My husband nodded in agreement with his father. "That's right. Maybe it's better to divorce a wife who can't treat my parents well," he remarked. I had been waiting for this. "Understood. Then let's get a divorce," I said clearly. A husband who brought up the idea of divorce and a wife who agreed to it. I hoped my smartphone in my pocket was recording this exchange well. With a feeling of prayer, I continued. "We will become strangers, so please return the $250,000 that River lent us as the construction cost of this house, parents-in-law." "Huh?" My parents-in-law raised their voices in surprise. My husband turned pale and looked at me, his face white beyond blue. "I will explain very politely to my parents-in-law who do not know the circumstances," I began. "It seems there is some misunderstanding. River did not contribute a single cent to the purchase cost of the house. This house was built only with my savings, because this person had no savings at all, due to a complete lack of planning. Since my husband and I both work, we shared the same amount of living expenses from each other's income. We had promised to save the remaining amount in each other's name, but this person wasted it and didn't put it into savings," I explained. "Hey, Josie, you don't have to go that far," River interjected. "It's all true," I continued. "And yet, when it came to buying a house, you wouldn't agree to have the house in my name, would you? So I made it so that I would lend you money. There's a loan agreement, so you can't pretend it didn't happen," I insisted. "That's," my husband stammered. I left my husband and parents-in-law, who were dumbfounded where they were, and quickly packed my valuables, clothes, my daughter's favorite toys, and clothes into a suitcase and a Boston bag. Holding my daughter's favorite penguin under my arm, I loaded them into my compact car and quickly drove off. I said goodbye to the newly built house that I had a short relationship with. After that, I picked up my daughter from the nursery and headed to my parents' house. My parents were quite surprised when I suddenly appeared with a large amount of luggage while they were in their jerseys. If it's sudden and inconvenient, I can go to a business hotel or something, I said hesitantly, and my parents hurriedly stopped me. I later heard my parents were worried. I might consider taking my daughter with me. In fact, it was the opposite. I had made a vow to protect my child no matter what. For the time being, I explained the situation to my parents that I was going to divorce my husband, who had no good points, and that I absolutely wanted to take care of my daughter. My parents promised to support me wholeheartedly, and they told me to live at their house for a while. This was a very grateful offer for me as I work. That evening, I summarized everything that had happened between my husband and my parents-in-law in a document. I saved the audio data from the conversations I had with my husband and my parents-in-law, which I had recorded on my smartphone, to my computer and external media. Armed with these, I took paid leave and used my weekends to visit several law firms. Finally, I found a lawyer who seemed trustworthy and formally requested their assistance. As I continued with my busy daily life, a week had passed in the blink of an eye since I left our new home. On that day, when I finished work and left the office, someone was waiting for me. It was my husband. I would like to call him my ex-husband, but since the divorce papers had not been processed yet, he was still my husband on the family register, which was unfortunate. Although we hadn't had any conversations, I was afraid of what might happen if he got angry and did something. So I looked for a place where there were people around and entered a cafe with him. I made sure to turn on the recording function on my smartphone just in case. I tried to stay as calm as possible and asked him, "Do you have something to say?" River was excited. "Yes, that's right," he began. About the house. I want to give it to you, Josie. I want to change the ownership. Can you just forget about the money?" my husband asked. "I'm sorry, but I can't bring myself to live in that house anymore," I replied. "Your parents stepped inside before us, didn't they?" I added. "Those little details don't matter," he said dismissively. "They matter to me. It's impossible," I stated firmly. After taking a sip of coffee, I looked closely at my ex-husband. His hair was messy, with strands sticking out in several places. He had stubble on his chin, and his complexion wasn't good either. Although he was wearing a suit, his white shirt was wrinkled, and it seemed like he hadn't ironed it or taken it to the cleaners. I didn't know what kind of life he was living, but I thought he looked quite worn out. "Please, Josie," River pleaded. "I can't easily repay such a large sum of money." "You knew it was a large sum when you borrowed it, didn't you?" I replied firmly. "I suggested that we put the house in both our names, and I even proposed that it could be in my name alone. But you refused to let go of the idea that it should be your house, your name on it," I noted firmly. River looked down and muttered, "That's because I thought I was the head of the household. Even though I mentioned divorce, I wasn't serious. Why did you take it seriously?" "I'm serious," I said, my voice resolute. "I'm fed up and I'm definitely getting a divorce. If it were just a lack of ambition, it would be one thing, but I can't imagine being stuck with such rude parents," I resented. River seemed taken aback. London is waiting for me. So if we're done talking, I'm going home," I finished, turning away. "Wait," he suddenly called out, desperation creeping into his voice. "I'll be the one to take care of London," River added. I felt uneasy at my ex-husband's words. When I returned home, I asked my parents to be careful not to let London be taken away by force. A few days after my ex-husband's visit, I received a call from the nursery saying that someone who appeared to be my parents-in-law had come. I left work early and hurried to the nursery. Fortunately, I had informed them in advance, so my parents-in-law were waiting for me in a separate room. They had made sure that London wouldn't meet them. When I entered the room where my parents-in-law were, my mother-in-law immediately shouted, "Give back our grandchild, you greedy thief!" Taken aback, I replied, "What do you mean by a greedy thief? I haven't stolen anything." "If you're not a thief," my father-in-law snapped, "then you're a fraud. You must have done something wicked to earn that money. Otherwise, there's no way you could have that much money at your age," he continued. I took a deep breath and said calmly, "No, all the money I lent to River is mine. It's the money I earned fairly and squarely. My own money, money I received from my parents, and money I received as a gift from my grandmother while she was still alive," I explained. "Huh? A gift?" my mother-in-law questioned, surprised. "Yes," I explained. Every year, they transferred an amount that was not subject to gift tax to an account in my name. The total amount, the money I received from selling stocks in my name, and the savings I had accumulated all added up to that amount. My mother-in-law looked confused, and my father-in-law muttered, It really was Josie's money. I continued, "Didn't you ever consider giving River a gift while you were still around? You can still do it now." But my father-in-law groaned and fell silent. My parents-in-law are flashy, love to show off, and love luxury more than anything else. They're an ordinary salaried family, so they probably don't have much savings and no passive income. It's clear that they never even thought of giving a gift while they were alive. "I'm sorry," I continued, "but I'm divorcing River. I'll take care of London myself. Please don't come to the nursery anymore because it's a nuisance," I concluded. I said that much and quickly took London and went back to my parents' house. My advice was in vain, and River and my parents-in-law came several times after that. Each time, I tried to talk to them as calmly as possible and send them away, but I was often grabbed by the arm or showered with abusive language. I recorded all of their behavior on my smartphone. About a month had passed since the day I left our new home. I sent a document through a lawyer requesting repayment of the debt and agreement on the divorce. My ex-husband agreed to most of it, but he showed a fighting spirit regarding custody. However, when I mentioned that I would claim compensation if we fought, he backed down. He had become quite docile after all. I had plenty of evidence, and he had no savings to pay. It took a little longer than I expected for my ex-husband to repay the debt. This was because the sale of the new house did not go as smoothly as I had hoped. At first, I thought that River and my parents-in-law would live in the new house together. The reason was simple. Neither my parents-in-law nor my husband could afford to pay the $250,000 purchase price. My husband didn't have any savings to begin with, and even if they sold the old house where my parents-in-law lived, it wouldn't be enough to cover the cost. In the end, we put the new house up for sale at a lower price than the purchase price, and after several price reductions, we finally found a buyer. The difference between the purchase price and the sale price, as well as the commission at the time of sale, was borrowed by my husband from the bank. My husband, who had lost his house and was burdened with debt, ended up living with my parents-in-law in their shabby house. Furthermore, my ex-husband's sister, who had divorced, returned with her 2 sons. The sons were in junior high school and high school. Perhaps because 6 adults were crowded into a small, dilapidated house, the sound of them verbally abusing each other echoed every day, and it became a topic of conversation in the neighborhood. This family no longer had anything to do with us. Since they couldn't even pay child support, there was no need to have any contact with them. 4 years have passed since then, and my daughter London is now in the 2nd grade of elementary school. The 2 of us are currently renting a room near my parents' house. On days when I come home late from work, my parents take care of London for me, and with their help, the 2 of us spend our days happily. I had thought that it would be nice to continue living with just the 2 of us without getting married again, but now I have someone I'm dating. He is a 36-year-old man with a 1st-grade daughter and a history of divorce. We often see each other when we drop off and pick up our children at the nursery, and we started talking, which led to a confession. Recently, the 4 of us have been going out together with our daughters. The other day, London casually said, "If we build a house, it would be nice if we all had our own rooms, and it would be great if we could have a dog." My heart skipped a beat when I heard those words. Actually, a little while ago, I received a proposal from that man. I'm waiting for an answer because of my daughters, but my mind is made up. I approached London and hugged her small back. I said, "That's right, I want to build a house again. This time, let's discuss it as a family and make a house where everyone can be happy."